Yo, everybody, this is an episode of I Own. It's a lot different than the other ones. It's a story time. And I thought I'd tell some stories about my life. And what I did was I sat down and I just wrote a quick bullet point list of a bunch of things that were coming up. And of those bullet points, most of them were about sex and masturbation. And then the other ones were about extended periods of fasting and different types of ceremonies and psychedelics I've been to. So apparently most of my life is about sex, masturbation, and ceremony, which is quite true. So I'm not going to go in chronological order, but let's start with the first time I discovered masturbation. So in sharing this, it's like a really authentic and open and personal thing. And I'm opening up the space in a kind of a comedic way to explore things a little bit off kilter, a little bit out of the normal, at least out of the normal for the things I present online. So with that, let's take it away. So how did you discover masturbation? Like, I was never taught. I discovered it. And what a discovery it is to be a young boy and to all of a sudden, for me, start rubbing against the bed and realizing there's a hard structure attached to my body that feels very pleasurable when I grind on my bed. Very intuitively, I found that it was easier to hump a pillow. They call it dry humping, but it doesn't stay dry for long. And I needed somewhere to continually jizz, so I jizzed all over a pillow. And I continued to use this pillow. It almost became a brick, to be honest. And I was quite young. Wasn't driving. I certainly wasn't going out and buying pillows. So I had to start coming in socks. And over the years, I continued to build up all of these cum socks and pillows. And I kept them in a treasure chest. So just save that piece of knowledge. That'll be relevant later. But I was an avid masturbator. As soon as I discovered it, it was like discovering the cure for cancer. I didn't share it with everyone. But I masturbated every day before bed. Every night before bed would be a proper way of saying that. And I remember one story, because me and my sister lived in the upstairs. It was like an attic. And we had separate rooms, but they were quite close because it was quite a small little attic space. And I had a six-pack when I was very young because I played sports since elementary school. And my sister was very proud of me. She's a good sister. She always built me up, and she taught me how to write, and she did a lot for me. And I remember a conversation she was having at the dinner table or with somebody, with a group of friends. And she's like, my brother has a six-pack, and he works really hard at it. I hear him every night before bed. I hear the bed. It's like, ear, 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 ear. And I was like, okay, she can hear me masturbating. That didn't stop me. But I did. I did every single night. And I was very disappointed. Not in like the Catholic way of like masturbation's wrong. But it was a disappointment because I discovered this great thing. And when I ejaculated, I wanted it to last forever. I was like, why can't I keep coming? And I found that some of the ejaculations lasted longer. So I was like, there's something I can do to prolong it. Why can't this just happen over the course of like multiple hours? And I tried. I did a lot of experimentation of different things, which is a general theme, which I'm sure we'll touch more into. I'm very much an explorer. And I didn't figure it out. I didn't figure out how to come for hours. Till I was much older and I discovered Tantra and that you can have multiple orgasms that can last for hours. I can think of one where I took acid actually, and I was doing breath work and masturbation, and I got into this pumping rhythm, and the cerebral spinal fluid, which fills the spinal cord, was pumping. So much so that there was this rhythmic pulsing that eventually I let go of the pulsing and my whole body started pulsing. I was naked in summer out in the forest alone, and I was expressing my orgasm. And then all of a sudden it hit me like a wave, like the rhythmic pulsing began to move me. And there was something awoken from within me, and my body started to orgasm. The kind of shivering and the pleasurable sensations, and it lasted for about an hour, 2 hours. It was a very long time, and it was very tiring, and yet it was amazing. It was a cosmic orgasm, one of many that I've had, but I didn't know how to do it when I was younger. It takes a lot of work and teaching. So back to masturbation. Let's talk about the chest. I had some friends over when I was, let's go. I'm not so good with the dates and times, but I was in a Christian school till grade 10. And it was definitely while I was in the Christian school. So we're talking like grade 8 or 9 maybe. And I had some friends over. And when you have good friends over, they just go through your stuff and look around your room. And I didn't hide the chest. It was just in the corner there. And one of my friends peeks into the chest and opens it, and I see him step back and gasp like he's just been assaulted. And he remarked at the smell that came out of it, this old, cummy, odorous musk that was coming off of it. And he never really let me live that one down, and he brought it to school, not the chest, of course, it stayed in my room, but he brought that story to school. And in a Christian school, there's not a lot, or in the Christian school that I went to, there wasn't a lot of people who were really exploring the edge. And I was one who was trying all sorts of things. I was getting high off of gravel and trying to smoke banana peels. And I was one of those, 1% kids who was the ones that the teachers would have to look after or watch out for. And when these stories went around, because it was so out of the range of normal, they definitely spread like wildfire. So my chest, my masturbation treasure chest, got a lot of talk among the town. Especially one little object that was in it. Because, as I mentioned, I developed a very scientific way of approaching masturbation. I created my own pocket pussy. And I don't even know, I don't think I looked this up. I don't think I just made it up. I might have heard it somewhere. But a pocket pussy is essentially a device that is more pleasurable, perhaps, than the hand. And what I did was I took a towel, like a tea towel, hand towel. And then I put a glove in there, like a latex glove. And then I wrapped that, so it's like a cylinder. I wrap up the towel with the glove in it, and then I put some rubber bands around there. You can tighten it to your own pleasure. And then I filled it with lubrication. And it was pretty obvious because I would always steal my mom's hand lotions. She said, "Where's all my hand lotions?" And she didn't eventually, I don't think she ever confronted me, but she knew. And I would use the pocket pussy. And he discovered the pocket pussy, among other things. So quite the reputation there. And that continued to grow because we talked about masturbation a lot, us Christian school boys. And I don't know about public school, private school, what y'all masturbation history is like. Maybe that's why I'm making this podcast. And we talked about masturbation a lot, sharing how we did it. And we would do certain things. Like I remember one time I arranged a no fap contest. And everybody was a chronic masturbator, I found out. And it was very difficult for anyone to make it past the 2 or 3 day mark. And I remember one time I won a contest and I went to a month. And everybody else was out at 10 days. They're like, "Zach, you still on it?" I'm like, "I'm still on it." But just as the Seinfeld episode, I was out the first day. I was gone and I just lied about it. But there was no prizes, so I didn't have to give back any rewards. And I eventually did come clean. I was absolved of my sins. And we would do these other games, we would have a circle of us guys, and we would do Have You Ever? Have you ever came while watching porn? Put your hand up. Have you ever came in a sock? Put your hand up. And there was like a bunch of common ones and everybody else was in. And I would just, if it was a contest and it really wasn't, I would definitely win. Because I would be like, okay, who here has masturbated with a piece of pizza? And put my hand up. Okay, who here has masturbated at school? I'll put my hand up. So I was definitely a little bit out there as a kid. And it's hard growing up in a Christian school. Because it's very black and white. And I didn't get a lot of explanation of why things were black and white. So it was like, drugs are bad. Okay. There's no explanation. So when I discovered drugs and I took them, and I was like, these things aren't bad. There was something that happened in my brain where I was like, oh, everything they say bad isn't bad. So everything they had taught me about sinning and everything they taught me about don't do that, I was like, oh, I should go do that now. Because obviously, if drugs aren't bad and this is how they are, this is completely wrong. They've got it all wrong. And I was so ignorant when I was young. Like, smoking cannabis was one thing, but this one kid who was like the baddest kid in our grade, he brought happy pills to school. And this was street MDMA, known as ecstasy. And I didn't really understand that these things weren't to be taken regularly. So it was like a Tuesday, and I'd just take it at school, be all pooky-eyed and Bible class. And, it really didn't do me a lot of well. It's good to have education, good to be taught well. The other thing, before we move on from this masturbation saga, is that I would go to the local co-op near my home. I would bike there and I would get dick pills. There's like herbal supplements and a bunch of other things that you could find that would make you hard, would make me hard. Make me hard for hours. Not Viagra, but there was stuff and that worked. It worked really well. And I would masturbate for long periods. Once again, I worked on this stuff like it was the science. I grew up for a lot of my childhood in an acreage. So I have an older sister, and I didn't have friends. So I guess I just masturbated. The first woman that I made love to, I don't think you can call it making love at that point. The first woman that I repeatedly put my dick in and out of, I took those dick pills, and I'm pretty sure it was like over an hour of sex, which was probably really difficult, which definitely was really difficult for a first-timer, for her as a first-timer, to receive that much penetration. But it was a hoot for me and my dick pills. So, yeah, I was kind of an idiot and insensitive then. And one other thing about the yard and the acreage, I would like dig holes. My mom would hate it because I would dig these giant holes in the back, and she would mow the lawn, and there would be these like big pits. Sometimes I would fill them up with water and I would sit in them. Sometimes I would just like sit in them. And individuals, when they're like, I'm going to be a doctor, and there's like a clear line of instances where it was obvious that individual would always become a doctor. It was so clear in their blueprinting and who they are. It's like, yes. And they knew it from a young age, and then they went on to become a doctor. Well, I did so many weird things in the forest and sitting in holes and getting high up banana peels. It's so clear to me now that I was meant to work in the realm of altered states of consciousness. And as a ignorant and very naive child, obviously I was doing it in a way that I'm not still doing it, thank God. But there was these trail marks of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. There was a part of me that was seeking something which was more profound than definitely those acts were. Like, another theme that I'd like to share here is that early on in my life, I love the extremes. And there's a part of me, like the archetype of an addict in there, this obsessiveness. And it's interesting now, because my life is all about harmony. It's all about balance. It's all about a high level of system and organization, and not going too far into one direction to throw the balance of holistic alignment off. But when I was quite young, I was really deep into becoming obsessed with things. Like, for example, when I was in my 20s, my set weight is around 175, give or take 10 pounds. If I'm not carrying excessive muscle and if I'm all healthy, that's where I'm at. And then there was a point in my life when I went up to 230 pounds. And then within quite a short period of time, I went down to 120. So let me explain how that all happened. So 230 pounds, it was just all muscle. I never had fat on me when I was 230. And this was because at the about 18, I was working a construction job, and I was working at a construction plant. And there was about 150 males, childish males. And a lot of them, the older guys, they were doing steroids. And I decided to partake. I was already deep into working out in the gym, starting to get into bodybuilding. So I did a cycle, and it worked quite well. I did another cycle, and my body began to just grow and grow and grow. And like the 18-year-old mind has a very undeveloped prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning, the higher rational and cognitive thought process, the capacity to inhibit desires and unproductive patterns of mind. And what the body is full of when you're 18 is testosterone and hormones. And when I was 18, I decided to jack up my levels to like, who knows how many times what their regular is. And this hyper-masculinized, totally didn't say that word right, but you get it, my brain. And there's something interesting. There's a spectrum between the male and the female brain, or the masculine and the feminine brain, is a better way of saying it, in that when you become more feminine, your brain becomes more empathetic, and you become more masculine. This is not male and female. We become more masculine in the brain. Your brain becomes more systematic. So there's this spectrum of becoming more associated with feelings and more associated with systems. And towards the high end of the systemizing spectrum is an autistic person. And towards the other end, we have a whole different character. But when I went to the hyper masculinization and the increase in testosterone, it basically brought out those characteristics in me, which were the systemizing, the goal-orientated type A achiever. And it made me very emotionally blunted for certain. And it enhanced and amped up and amplified my desire for sex, working out, eating, and accomplishing. The testosterone circuits are very much associated with the dopaminergic circuits as well. So there's risk-taking behaviors, reward-related behaviors, and like the pursuit of those rewards. And of course, a little bit of the substance abuse and other things intertwined in there. So when I look back at my history, I gotta say that I don't regret it. It's not an energy that I feel is helpful. I've done a lot of work on it to understand why I was like that and the negative and positive consequences for me and other people in my life. Luckily, I don't have long-term consequences for what I was doing. I was well observed by doctors. Except I did have some pretty bad side effects when I went off one of my cycles. Now, of course, I had a lot of other side effects of rebalancing my brain because it's, we're building our mind all the time. And that hyper-masculinization, I'm still not saying that right, really threw me off for many years, but I'm not going to go into that saga. But one of the times when I was coming off steroids, I grew these big pecs, Not just that the muscles grew, but I threw off my hormones because I was doing my cycle wrong, which doesn't need to be explained. The important part to share is I got big tits. I had these big, juicy, supple jugs that were producing milk because my estrogen had jacked up so high. So I've been a lactating man. You know, the polarities. I like the polarities. I want to be a man and a woman, apparently, which is it's a rising phenomenon. Might as well take part. And I also burst out with acne all over my whole body, which thank goodness it didn't scar. But I had acne on like my biceps and my triceps, my whole chest, my face, my neck. It was quite the thing to go off of when I came into this world as a bodybuilder and very obsessed with being in the mirror and my looks, and then all of a sudden to be a man with big boobs and tits that are lactating and full of acne. So that was like a big karmic punch. And that's part of the medicine of what I did in my early years at a subconscious level, was go towards a polarity and, you know, hit rock bottom and do it to the degree where I really learned the lessons. Like, I'm not saying this is something I advise. It's not necessary. But I did it, and it really polarized me towards doing the work that I do now with such seriousness, with putting my whole heart into it, because I did enough of these mistakes that it got me in so much trouble that the only way for me to continue to survive was to learn how to thrive, how to learn how to really take care of myself. And I had every addiction you can think of, from, I didn't finish the story about 120 pounds. Well, it actually perfectly dances into what we're talking about. So 230 pounds, and I was living a life where I did some dealing of plants and some other things. So I was a drug dealer, and I was hanging around with a gangster crew, a bunch of cowboys, a bunch of gangsters. And I knew I didn't like the life. I was learning my lessons. I was like, this is not the way I want to live. This is not going to work. So I went away to university, did some years, and I was like, I want to be a smart person now. I hadn't been a smart person my whole life. I didn't think I was smart. I carried that story for a little bit. I was a jock and many other things, but I wasn't a smart person. So I was like, I'm going to be a smart person now. I got really interested in studying, and I went to university. I became a Dean's List scholar, and I was really adamant, to the obsessive degree I was adamant about working out. I transitioned that towards studying. And in university, I would study and do all my homework, and then in class, I'd be done everything, so I would study more things, and I would go to the library. And I was studying psychology and neuroscience in school for a bit, and I studied how the brain works, how the brain wires, and how the brain learns. Came across some information like the Hebbian theory, that neurons that fire together wire together. It kind of goes along with Pavlovian, you know, the ring a bell, dog salivates, parastimulus, and a response. And I was learning all this stuff, and I was like, I need to addict myself to studying as a very clear and conscious process. So if you tie something pleasurable to something, you know, neutral, you can make that neutral thing pleasurable. So I would find all these ways, like coffee's one, increases dopamine, but I was microdosing MDMA at the library to try to addict myself to studying, which worked sometimes, but it often ended up, I would just go home and masturbate. I was still dealing with the sexual addiction there because I was alone. I moved away to Toronto and didn't know anyone. And it was a large period of my life, besides my private school class, I didn't really go out and make a lot of friends. So I just studied, right? I was in the library all the time. So all my shadows had a great opportunity to come up. And the MDMA didn't work as a study drug. And I was like, what can I do? Let's go to my doctor. And let's tell him I have ADHD, and I'll describe all the symptoms, and then he'll prescribe me like Ritalin. And it worked. I didn't get Ritalin. I got Dexedrine, which is basically pharmacological meth. It's the same crystalline salt pretty well, just made in a lab and a little bit better for you, question mark. At least it wasn't being injected. And that helped me to study. And it also helped me because I understood that if I don't eat so much, my cognition is a little bit higher. Quite a lot higher, actually. And I found that I didn't need to eat a lot if I just do a lot of Dexedrine. So I just pretty well stopped eating and I started studying for 10, 12 hours a day. And it wasn't too long before 230 pounds turned to 120 pounds. And I just withered away. And in my ignorance, I eventually learned my lessons, and I've never had to go into rehab or anything. I go, oh, I'm an idiot. I need to pick up my discipline. And then I pick up my bootstraps and I pull myself out of that pattern. Thankfully, it was like a repeating pattern, but it would always have a different face. You know, it might have been cocaine for a while. It might have been steroids and Dexedrine. It was like the same pattern, but completely different things. And the final one was yoga. I became really obsessed and addicted to yoga, which is a funny thing to be addicted to. But I would do yoga in a way where it wasn't so beneficial. And I would do it as an avoidance pattern, which was another compiling effect of what I was dealing with, avoidance patterns, instead of dealing with the things coming up within me and around me. But eventually enough of that yoga began to straighten me out. This and obsessive meditation, etc. So that was part of how I began to rehabilitate the deeper shadows and subconscious processes which were wreaking havoc and sabotaging my in general real desire to help people. One of the reasons why I wanted to study was I became really focused on becoming a neuroscientist for quite a while. That's what I really wanted to do, and I really wanted to help people. And there was a few other trails before I really understood what my path was, which isn't a neuroscientist, and the life of a neuroscientist definitely wasn't in my blueprinting. And maybe I should talk about my transition here. The major catalyst for my life to completely flip over into, I guess the chapter of where I'm at now as a guide, as a space holder, as an energy healer, as someone who holds various types of sacred lineages and ceremonies. And the major catalyst was a breakup. And in that relationship, I met her when I was in school, and I fell in love with her. And it was a really hard relationship. It really broke me. And it broke me because I really did love her. And there was a recognition of a very deep level of myself meeting a very deep level of her. And there was an initial spark of that, a recognition of that in a moment. And then what happens for me and what happens for many people is all the shadow, all the conditioning, all the process, all the things that we wear on our surface, our masks, they get in the way of that. And though we worked really hard at trying to keep that fire and to sweep aside everything in ourselves that was getting in the way, we weren't able to do that. And then it's been years of me doing inner work to really understand, to heal. And actually, it was just in a recent ayahuasca ceremony where I had another breakthrough, and perhaps there will still be more. But it's still offering me wisdom. And the breakthrough that I just recently had was I did enough healing to come back to that initial moment when I first saw her that wasn't even registered at the time, but it's this like spark that I'm speaking to, that it's like there's a recognition of something very deep happening that the conscious mind is unable to process. And then I remember in our falling in love and in our courtship, there was like, what is this force that is consuming me? And what is this drive? What is this flame of love that is like tearing me apart in beautiful and ugly ways? And over time, it became so hard to see. But recently in that ceremony, I found the original heart, the original piece of my love. I saw like what it was that made me fall in love with her, like her purity, her soul level, like not anything physical, not anything emotional, not anything that we had chatted about and likes, dislikes, like the piece of her that I can't speak to. And just to touch back into that, and there's like an energy that I lost at that time. We can lose our energy to the past and to old relationships and the ties that we have with people. And that moment in that ceremony was me recapturing that love that I had lost. So it came with a really beautiful awareness. But when that relationship broke, it broke me. It shattered me. And I've never since had an emotional event so capable of like taking me to my knees. Like I would literally drop to the ground, unable to stand because of the emotional waves that are moving through. And it was under those waves and in that state of surrender that I was able to see myself clearly. And I had been doing inner work since I was 19 because I went to I had an early childhood depression, and it carried with me through most of my teens. And I started doing inner work when I was like 19. I did cognitive behavioral therapy and went to a therapist, and I was on meds a little bit before that even, but those weren't actually helping. But I started doing work for many years before this. But that's when I actually had the consciousness and the intent to see how ugly I was, to see how sick and how addicted I was, how desirous I was for sex, and how addicted I was to pleasurable substances and the avoidance patterns, and that didn't sit with me. And I was like, I'm going to become celibate. I'm going to pray all the time. Oh, I wouldn't have said pray all the time. I'm going to meditate all the time. And I'm going to commit my life to yoga. And I became very austere. That was about the time when I started practicing like religiously 2 to 4 hours a day. And I've kept that up for over 5 years. I was practicing before that, but it wasn't as dedicated. And that period of celibacy offered me the initial clearing of my mind that gave me some momentum to begin the healing process of reclaiming my body, my energy, my stories, and doing many practices like Ho'oponopono, which is a 4-lined mantra or prayer that says, I'm sorry, I ask for your forgiveness, I thank you and I love you. And it's meant to be repeated over and over, and it helps to clear up the psyche, purify the mind. And I did this for hours for my ex-partner, for my parents, even for many, many of the people that I masturbated to on porn, just to help to clear that energy off of my mind. Because when we watch so much porn, the mind and in the subconscious, it learns just like that Hebbian theory of neurons wiring and firing together. So that's deeply ingrained in the habit patterns of the mind, and it will crave that or want to move back towards those energies if the system is not purified of that, or the system doesn't have a greater direction which is pulling it forward and out of those energies. So I did a lot of work with that, and that brought me out of that phase of my life, being so caught in those subconscious patterns. And that obsessiveness, which I was speaking about, that I transitioned into yoga, had this great benefit because that, I know it as like a Scorpio energy that I have within me that is like super obsessive. If you can channel that energy the way that I channel that energy, it's like, okay, this is how I do a 10-hour dance. This is how I do a 3-day dance ceremony with 12 hours of dancing. This is how I do 4 vision quests. This is how I do, probably like 60 hours or more of asana a month on top of my work schedule. There's like an obsessiveness there. And it just needed for me to be worked with in a way that it became healthy. So one of the things that I did to purify my mind at another stage that I'd like to share is I went to Salt Spring for like a month and a half. And then I practiced like 5 to 10 hours a day. And what does that mean? Like, am I just doing asana the whole time? No. I might do a morning asana and then into meditation, into breath work. And then I'll just sit by the ocean. And, you can call that not practicing. But when your mind is clear and you're aware of the breath and you're immersed in nature, there's a capacity, especially when you practice for days and days on end with no stress, that you just stay in meditation, this effortless state of concentration. So I had this like deep level of awareness prolonged for a month or more. And I would continue to practice, and I would eat mushrooms, mostly mushrooms, a little bit of nuts. I was vegetarian on the island, hardly eating. When I say mushrooms, I do mean the magical kind. And I would just eat them. And I eventually would eat like 50 grams of mushrooms. My grocery bill turned into a mushroom bill. And I developed a capacity to fly. Not literally. I'm not saying I'm a levitator. But I found a way to move incredible amounts of energy through mixed mind body arts practices in combination with powerful psychedelics. This is not a recommendation for any individual to do. There was many side effects of doing this to the degree I did without the proper training, because I'm not saying, once again, this can't be done in a good way. I didn't have the great knowledge and skill to know what I was working with when I was working with such powerful medicines. But that really uplifted me to a level that helped me to, once again, transition from an older life. And I've done many deep journeys, but that stands out as one of the pivot points in my life where I was really efforting to become a spiritual person, whatever that means to you, quote unquote spiritual. I was really efforting, and I hadn't learned to ease. I could touch in the space of ease, but what happened was in that time I efforted to such a degree that literally my crown just like blew open, and 1,000-petal lotus was the visual that did come out. And ever since that day, and there have been many other major points, but it was like I was efforting at spirituality, but then it was like I pulled the plug out of the sink, and now process was just swirling around on its way out. And it was more like holding on rather than I was starting the fire to initiate the process. And after that, I did a 4-day dark retreat, which is an amazing one. And this was still in my early days when I wasn't too connected to ceremony. And I had 4 days off. So I was like, what am I going to do? Let's board up my room. I don't need to eat. I can just pee in a big jug and I'll drink my pee. So I don't need to drink. So I stayed in the room for 4 days on the floor. And then I did a big mushroom journey right at the end of it. As you do. One of the most significant things I'll share from that journey was when the senses, because they're usually receiving stimulation, chemical stimulation in the nose, vibrations in the ears, photons in the eyes. When you stop that sensation, you go into sensory deprivation. And when the senses don't have enough stimulation, one no longer needs to live in the three-dimensional world that is so built by the senses. And when one doesn't live in that space, they live in a more timeless, spaceless space, which was the experience entering into the void. Everything was expansive darkness, like a big womb. My whole body and sense of proprioception of where I was in space disappeared, and I disappeared, and I became very like I expected to practice a lot. I was like, it's dark, sensory deprivation, it might be like a float tank, and I could probably get really deep into my practices, do some qigong and yoga. I laid on the floor the whole time. I was almost incapacitated. Might have been just the fast and what it was doing to me, but I just laid there for days. And there was this shift in me, because if you've ever fasted, you might know this. There's a real appreciation for food and a longing that has many layers. One is like the emotional relationship that we have with food, but there was just like missing it, like a lover, like a friend. And I craved light like I craved food, which is quite an interesting thing to have. And I wanted it. I wanted it on my skin. I was fantasizing about light. I was like, I want it on my skin. And when I set an alarm for when my time was up, and it was like 3.5 or so days, however long I had, and I cracked open the window, and it was light outside, and a big beam of light came down, and it hit me, and I just started bawling. I started crying, and I opened the door, and I walked outside, and I was just looking around, and it's one of the most like pure moments that I can touch back into, of like the filters of the acquired mind that thinks it's seen things, so there's a familiarity with it. A lot of that had been wiped out, so it looked like I was seeing life and beauty for the first time. And this was as if seeing through my true nature's eyes, not my personality and not the conditioned mind. This was a great refresh, which gave my life a lot of energy, and I consistently sought out many other things like that to continually re-up that, and for me to remember who I am at that level. If I go back even before these ones, actually, one of the big transition points was when I took myself on a vision quest. Now, I've done 3 vision quests in their more proper way with an indigenous elder. This was something I did on my own. I didn't know a lot of people in the spiritual world. This was before I came out to really being in community. And I recognized that most cultures around the world, they have spiritual traditions. They might not call themselves that, but they have rites of passage and other things that allow individuals to transition from stages of life. For example, men don't have a large transition from boyhood to adulthood that is so defined in their biology like a woman. Whereas a woman's body begins to bleed, or when the time is right, and if that's her life path, she will have a child. These are transition points which are undeniable, where the biology and the whole psychic structure changes. Whereas a man doesn't have that. So unless they go through an initiation, or they self-initiate, or they take on a challenge, or they receive a responsibility, there's no psychic catalyst that allows them to make that transition. And I wanted to do my best to attempt the self-initiation, so I did 10 days of fasting in the forest. And I brought a prayer book, and this is when I first started praying. I was more so meditating before this, and prayer was something I didn't feel so comfortable with because I grew up in a Christian home, and I was still healing that and finding my own way with it. And I brought that book, and I meditated, and I prayed, and as I do, I did like 10 grams of psilocybin mushrooms at the very end of the journey. And that was a very potent journey, as you can imagine, when you're so sensitive and so tuned in. And one of the significant pieces that I'll share from that is I learned to walk with spirit. And it wasn't so much, it was really easy. Like the force of life, of nature, was moving me. And there was this really beautiful guidance. It was dancing me, and I was along for the ride. And it wanted me, it guided me, and I could flow with it to go to these different groves and trees, and it would take me to very beautiful parts of the forest. I was up in the hills, up in the mountains in Harrison. And I could resist it. Like there was this sense of guidance. My body wanted to flow and move a certain way, but I could easily just go, I don't want to do that, and walk off. But all of a sudden my whole psyche would like collapse in intense fear. At one point I saw helicopters coming over as if they're going to like attack me. And then as soon as I let go and got back on my path of where this guidance wanted me to go, then everything would go harmonious. And it was like this on-off, on the path, off the path. And this is what's happening in life at all times. There's a path. It's an unwritten path. It's not moralistic. It's nothing that can really be spoken about. And it was so clear in that moment that I'm still working with that, to listen and to flow with life. It's much harder when I'm not in the mountains. As many people know, it's harder to live in harmony when we're constantly pulled out of ourselves and on computers. But there is a way to sit and to breathe and to walk and to make our way through the world. And this is one of the things that Qigong and other practices such as yoga have taught me. I work a lot on my breathing. I work a lot on how I stand. Standing practice. Been doing about 20 minutes a day. Sitting practice. How to sit. So there is a way to sit. There is a way to sit effectively and efficiently. There's not one way. But there is a way that keeps one in harmony with this inner guidance system. And part of learning to walk with spirit is learning to pray. And what I mean by pray, it can mean many things, but the dimension I'll share is that a prayer is a focused intention, and it's a conversation between you and the universe. And your prayers are your goals, or your dreams. They're the things you're directing your energy to, so the energies don't get caught in those older cycles, that habit pattern, for me, the addict, and the other shadowy pieces of myself. And when we live our prayers as an embodied action, it's not just like I'm asking some other force. I'm having a conversation with the universe and all the forces, but I'm embodying something. And I'm lifting up these words, these prayers. And so that when I pray in a good way, I pray for myself and all beings, so that my actions, my words, my thoughts are all in alignment with that. And there's a way to walk your prayer. There's a way to breathe your prayer with every breath. And now we breathe about 22 to 26,000 times. There's a lot of deconditioning to do, because there's a lot of habit patterns that have brought our life into one direction. And if we want to take it in another, we have to recapture that energy. Just like I recaptured the energy from my relationship where I lost so much of myself. And I did this 10-day fast. And then one of the major reasons why I did it was praying for my purpose. I was coming into my initiation of coming into adulthood, and I was like, what's my purpose? And then within a few weeks, I was invited to come to a peyote ceremony. It was a collaboration between the Huichol and the indigenous population, the First Nations here. And the peyote medicine is brought up from Mexico. And the ceremony in its brevity is around a fire, a circle. There's a water drum, repeatedly beated, which puts the mind into a trance. And a rattle shakes up the energies. Once again, it works with the trance mind. And then individuals pray around the circle. They pray in their indigenous tongue, and they pray prayer songs as well as English songs. And the whole time you're focused on this fire, and you pray all night, dark till sunrise. And I'm praying for my purpose. I'm praying for my purpose. And this is the alchemy. This is the magic that we have when we can pray in this way. That very morning, after my mentor, who would come to be my mentor, I met for the first time, and he asked what I did, and I told him I love to do qigong and yoga and breath work, but I was just kind of building this stuff on my own. And he's like, oh yeah, I do that. I'm a qigong teacher, a yoga teacher, and a breathwork teacher. And he's like, oh, you should come work with me. And literally it was like that. I'm not saying since then everything has just like that gone my way, but there have been major points where there's been a helping hand of grace. And of course that grace comes when we're open to grace, when we've made the proper preparations. And part of the fasting, I truly believe, is what was the catalyst for that. So once I started to understand this quote unquote spiritual science, this science of deconditioning and rewiring our subconscious and learning how to pray, and where I'd like to take this now is kind of directing it out for you, and to offer that, when I was young, I was very lost for a long time, and I made many decisions in my life in what I studied in university, and they had many what I thought were wrong turns in my life. But there's a trust that I have, and I know many teachers who say the same thing, and I can honestly say with my whole heart that this is true, that no matter what you've done in your past and what you're doing, you may think that you're off the road, but everything that you're doing now is necessary for you to get to where you're going. And your life can go in any colorful way. You can be a sex-addicted masturbator at a Christian school, completely against what they're teaching, and you might come around the bend and find out you'd be praying too. When I first met my partner, I wasn't very spiritual. I liked psychedelics and I liked Zen philosophy a bit, but I wasn't very spiritual. And she's like, you're going to be a yoga teacher, you're going to love astrology, you're going to love breath work and all these things. And I was like, no. And she tried for years to encourage me to go in this way and share things with me, and I was completely against it. And then I ended up becoming that to the extreme. So be careful who you make fun of, because you'll probably become them. And that's why I still make fun of people and myself, because there's a love there, and there's a surrendering in that, yeah, now I can make fun of myself and other people and know that it just comes from a different place. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share some of these things, which are a little bit more comedic, a little bit off the kiltered path, is with that openness, because I've done my work to wholly accept my life and to be able to work with who I was and the stories that I've been living by, that I was living by, and that are still remnants of my past. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to share in this platform for other individuals to hear and to offer the things that they might only share with their deepest friends in a very public way. Because I think that there's great value, and for me to say this stuff as a teacher, as someone who assists in trauma therapy and sacred ceremony, there was a moment of hesitation of like, can I say this kind of information, and can I make jokes which people might take not in the way that I intended them, like in the way that you speak to your friends, where there's a recognition, or the way in which a comedian speaks, where they're like, this is a comedy show, so I'm going to say some inappropriate things, and yet even at comedy shows, when people still get offended and misinterpret. So there is a inherent risk there, but there's also an openness and availability to connect with the people who can really hear those things. And many of my teachers have said, not a lot of people are going to accept you. And a lot of them actually aren't going to like you, but a lot of them are going to like you, and a lot of them are just going to be neutral and not really care. So the more that you can stand in your truth and then hold yourself in that wholeness and accept your stories in a really beautiful way, and then you can live. You can live fully without hesitation. So that's my prayer and encouragement for you, to live without hesitation, to fully hone your stories, maybe share some of your quote-unquote embarrassing stories, or whatever it is that's hidden in your closet that might feel really good. It's like a psychic relief. Sometimes we can't complete those stories unless we revisit them in a good way. Like, one more example, as I'm trying to conclude, I keep bringing more things up. I wasn't able to sing for most of my life. I didn't learn to sing. I didn't sing. I had tongue difficulties, so speech problems when I was younger, and then I had hearing problems and partial deafness when I was younger as well. And then I just never picked up singing. So when I was young, I was quite an emotional teenager, and I would listen to a lot of emotional music, emo music. And I wanted to express what they were saying, so it was very therapeutic for me to listen to it. But what I really wanted, that I didn't know at the time, was to sing with them. But I didn't know how to use my voice. And then it's been recently, since I've been learning to sing and developing my voice, that I went back and I sung all those old songs. And once again, just like that relationship, I felt all this energy returning to me of things that I wanted to express, but never was able to at the time, because I wasn't able to touch on those emotions, and I wasn't able to express. I wasn't able to let out in a very developed way. So what's within you that might be from your past that needs to be completed and let go of in that good way? And are you now able to see it, to release it, and to regain that energy? Because that energy is energy that you can direct towards your goals and your dreams, that will move you at a faster rate, like a catalyst that is fuel for the fire for you to move forward on your stated goal or dream, or even your unstated goal or dream. That's a strange attractor that will be given to you by the gift of grace when you open yourself to it. Thank you for listening to Storytime with Aya. Aya Om.